Good morning. Good morning. That's a little better. That's a little better. I need that energy. I need to feed off of your energy. First of all, before my time starts, I have been already ministered to today. From the time I parked in that lot, that back space, and walked in, hospitality just permeates you, and I thank you. So I'm already in a good space. God has already ministered to me through you. So I hope that I have a word to return the favor that could minister to your soul as well. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you, Pastor Tim, Reverend Tim, for inviting me. As my old pastor, Bishop Kenneth Ulmer, used to say, I got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So I'm going to dive right in. I want to talk to you about something that's very dear to me, this word solidarity. I was challenged in one of my classes years ago. I was using the term reconciliation like everyone else. And my professor, Love Seacrest, said to me, that's not it. You need another word. And I went home and I wrestled with some things, and I came back and I just came up with, I didn't invent a word, it's just a word, solidarity. And she said, that's it. That's it. And from that day on, I've been trying to develop this theology of solidarity. Let me read from Luke chapter 10, verse 29 to 37, just that little section. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him. And when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said. He said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. I want us by the end of this message to know and embrace the difference between reconciliation, especially racial reconciliation, as we've used it in the last few years, and the work of solidarity, even though the latter can lead to the potential realization of the former. So it's not dismissing altogether reconciliation. That's the end goal. That's the beloved community. But the work that we do is the work of solidarity. And it's not just along racial lines. It transcends that in whatever categories we want to look at. The work is solidarity. I was asked by a local school to help lead them in racial reconciliation efforts, essentially DEI work. And I told them I don't believe in racial reconciliation. I did that on purpose just to shake some stuff up. But that I would teach them on racial solidarity. Don't get me wrong, I believe reconciliation is the end goal, as I just said, a reconciled, friendly community of people, the beloved community, as Dr. King once taught. But that isn't the work. The work is solidarity. Solidarity is the picture of what a reconciled community looks like. She quickly asked me, with a bit of reluctance in her voice, what do you mean by solidarity? Her initial excitement turned into reticence. I tried to make my case. And then she told me she didn't think the leadership would be on board. I never received a call from them after that. They were comfortable with the term reconciliation, but not solidarity. This was a Christian school, and it made me wonder if they were uncomfortable then with the example, with following the example of Jesus on the cross. The act of one man, God in flesh, who in solidarity with humanity gave his life, suffered, and died before being raised from that dark, cold tomb. He didn't have to. He could have evaded those who came to arrest him. We know he prayed that to the Father, that the Father would remove the cup of suffering while agonizing in the Garden of Gethsemane, but because solidarity is the work, he endured. There are two ideas from this passage I want to challenge us to both mimic and imagine. Imagine ourselves engaged in. So it says that the Samaritan was so moved with pity when he saw this man. What does that mean, to be moved with pity? He was tender enough to feel for and feel with the man. Did you catch that? He didn't just, sometimes I think it's easy to feel for someone. Oh, I feel for that person. It's very different to feel with them. It's a very different experience when I put myself in their shoes and I try to feel what they feel. And he was tender enough. We don't know where he was going. We don't know how busy he was. He may have had an emergency himself. But he was tender enough to stop when he saw this man and he felt pity. He felt for him and he felt with him. And then it says when he saw him, he felt this pity. So what does it mean to see? Because there's a difference between how he saw and how the priest and the Levite saw. In one sense, you can see with your eyes. In another sense, you can give attention to. You know, it's one thing for me to see Pastor sitting next to me. It's a very different experience when I turn and I pay attention to. Keep your eyes on that blazer, Pastor. I like that blazer. I see him right now in my periphery, but now I pay attention to him. But then there's a third way of seeing. There's a seeing where you become acquainted with the person by experience. I see with my eyes, I give attention to, but then I get close enough to where as I'm seeing, I'm becoming acquainted with this person just by proximity to them. Closer proximity to them. And I'm paying attention to posture. I'm paying attention to countenance. I'm paying attention to the vibe, as we say sometimes, the spirit of this man. And I begin to experience him. That's what was happening with the Samaritan. He didn't just see with his eyes. He didn't just give attention to. He became acquainted with this man. And then he went to him. He put himself in closer proximity. But he wasn't just putting himself in closer proximity to another person. He was putting himself in closer proximity to this person's wounds. That's solidarity. Where your wounds don't scare me. I'm not repelled by them. I'm actually drawn to you because of them. I want to know more. I want to know how I can heal. What can I do? How can I be of service? How can we turn those wounds into scars that represent healing? And then he bandaged his wounds. In other words, he engaged in restorative healing work in the moment. Then he put him on his animal. He shared resources with this man. So, he saw this man. He gave attention to this man. He was drawn to this man. He shared resources with this man. And he participated in restorative healing work with this man that he met in a moment, rather than come up with all the reasons why he could have walked to the other side of the road. This reminds me of when I lived in New York. I'm guilty. I'm walking to the gym, 5:30 in the morning. There's a man just like this in the middle of the street, face down. I thought he was dead. I was the priest and the Levite. I stayed on the sidewalk. I don't trust it. He might be faking it. I wasn't willing to take a risk. I called 911 as I stayed in the distance. Turns out he was in a drunken stupor, fell out in the street, and fell asleep in the middle of the street in Manhattan. But I was a bit of the Levite and the priest, because I kept a distance from this man. And I didn't take the time to see if he was really injured, if he was hurt, did he need my help? Every time I read this passage, I think back 22 years to that scene that morning. We must be willing to risk something. Here's what's not told in this passage. Imagine this man comes, he sees a wounded person, he stops, he's mending his wounds, he's pouring wine and oil, and he's making sure this man is together. He is preoccupied, he is focused on this man. Meanwhile, he doesn't know if he is now subject to the same robbery. He's taking a risk. He threw self-preservation out the window. Someone could have been waiting for the next person to come along, and it could have been him, and they could have taken him out too and robbed him. Solidarity requires risk. Reconciliation doesn't. Reconciliation only requires that you be nice to me when you see me. But you can preserve yourself in the process. It's a greater risk for those in positions or those with membership in groups of power. They generally are the ones that must be willing to and even initiate solidarity. Like I said, we don't know if this man is vulnerable because he was of a lower socioeconomic status, or if he was a wealthy man who is now vulnerable because he was robbed. Did you catch that? We don't know if he was a man, a homeless guy. We don't know if he was someone of low status. We know nothing about him in that regard. Or he could have been more wealthy and more influential than the Samaritan, but in that moment, the Samaritan has power. The Samaritan is in a position where he must initiate. I say that as someone who is both in a vulnerable community, but also in a community of power and privilege as a man. There's spaces when I have to initiate that solidarity with my sisters. As a straight man, there are places where I have to initiate that solidarity. There is no reality of reconciliation without the witness of solidarity. The other point that I highlight comes from a Martin Luther King Jr. speech. I want you to imagine that the road that this man was traveling on is symbolic of systems and structures. The road has conditions that allow for it to even be unsafe for anyone to travel. Some people are more vulnerable than others on this road. The curves, there's spots along the journey that are dark and someone can hide, a robber can hide in these spaces and take advantage of unsuspecting travelers. There's no known security on this road to make sure it's safe for people to travel. In other words, there are factors involved here. That if these factors aren't addressed, the road is going to continue to be unsafe for travelers. Tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, it will continue to self-perpetuate if we don't fix the conditions that cause the road to be unsafe in the first place. I got 1 clap, 2. The Samaritan man could only have done what he could have done alone, which was help the wounded man. He may not have been able to fix all these other factors that made the road unsafe, but he could raise his voice on behalf of those who may not have had as much of an influence as he did. Just because he may not be as vulnerable as the wounded man or others like him, because of the work of solidarity, if the road is unsafe for this man, then it is unsafe for all. And the urgency should not arise only after it happens to us. Yes, I'm going to come right here and preach to you. We're going to have a conversation. The urgency should not arise only because it happened to me. Paul says if one member of the body suffers, all suffer. If you hurt, then I have to hurt. If I know you're hurting and I don't hurt, do I really see you? Do I see your humanity? In recent political rhetoric, after there was an assassination attempt on the former president's life, there's been this call for unity. And I don't celebrate or even take lightly someone trying to cause the death of anyone, no matter what I think about them or how I feel about them. But I have a question. How do you take a nation that is ideologically divided and bring them together in unity? Other than in incidents that pose a threat to everyone, regardless of ideological leanings, like 9/11. How do you do that? Ideology is grounded in strongly held beliefs that anchor people's lives. And what people are saying on the other side of the aisle becomes a threat to my life. How do you do that? Do they really want unity or do they want conformity? And I think both sides of the political and theological spectrum are guilty of this. But I think that Jesus was confronting this very thing. He was telling this parable to a Jewish audience. It wasn't just a lesson on loving one's neighbor. He made the so-called enemy, the Samaritan, the star in the story as he told it to the Jewish audience. He was challenging a theology that had the effects of ideology. He knew in order to bring about solidarity with one's neighbor, those who don't look like them, he would have to pierce the ideology kind of built into their understanding of God. See, reconciliation is let's get along. Let's not cause division by raising concerns that only impact some of us. Solidarity is let's eat together, worship together, suffer together, heal together, resist evil together. And as King once said, even go to jail together. Reconciliation is leaving room for self-preservation. Solidarity is entering into the spaces of the vulnerable and risking experiencing the residuals of their lived reality. Reconciliation makes space or creates enough distance for blindness. If I don't see it, then I can't be held responsible to participate in changing it, right? Blindness or ignorance can be because of distance or even philosophy like colorblind theology. Solidarity says, I see you and I'm willing to become acquainted with you and match my energy, time, and resources like the Samaritan man to help, empower, protect, and stand in allyship with you. I close with this. The story of solidarity in Scripture really centers on the story of the cross. The God-man in his act of solidarity with humanity by his choice to give his life. The story of solidarity in my life is still being written. I know that there are some people who likely will stand in solidarity with me if there was ever a physical threat or altercation. But I'm still waiting for solidarity with me when a system, an institution, or an organization, including the church, would override their self-preservation, their ideology, and their distance to stand with me. Because even as I stand here today, I have to resist the anxiety of being in a space, the Sunday church service space, where I've had the most woundedness. Most of my scars come from the church space. As a pastor, at that. There have been some Samaritans who have tried to help mend my wounds, but there are many others who claim to have loved me who walked to the other side of the road. But I hope they hear the good news. Solidarity, like the one Jesus modeled, is the work.